This is a question for developing an algorithm. So when it says develop an algorithm, essentially what it means is write a program in Python. So in the exams now, it's going to be Python that you can write in, if indeed Python's the language that you are using. So you don't have to write in pseudocode. In fact, it wants you to write in Python. So it's going to say that in the paper. So this particular one is it's an interesting little algorithm. It's essentially validating a string. So the fact it says it's a machine code instruction, that's fair enough. It's zeros and ones. So a string of zeros and ones only is what we're trying to validate to make sure that it is a string of zeros and ones. So the whole idea is that the string needs to be 8 characters long and only composed of zeros and ones, nothing else. So it gives us some ideas of examples for testing, and it should be outputting okay or wrong, or something of that nature. So okay or wrong is what we're outputting. So it then gives us a little bit of help as to how we're going to do this. So it prompts the user to enter an 8-bit machine code instruction. So I would always start with that idea because there's always going to be some marks for this anyway. So if you're thinking, oh, this is really difficult, I don't know how to do this to the end, start with the first bit. We're going to need to get an input from the user. So we need a variable for that. So you could call that MC instruction maybe, or something like that. It doesn't matter what it's called in many ways, but it should be something that is relevant. So that equals input, and in Python inputs we usually have a bracket here, and we're just going to say enter an 8-bit instruction. So we've done our first line, we've got MC instru. So our variable here is taking the value of whatever the user inputs. So that's the first bit that we've done. So it wants us to check that the instruction only contains the characters 0 or 1, and it also wants us to check that the instruction is exactly 8 characters long. So there's a few ways we can do that, but probably a good way is to have a variable like this. So we've got a variable here that I'm going to make a Boolean. So let's make it true, actually. We'll make that variable true. So in Python, we've got true or false as the Boolean values. So when you write those with a capital T, true, or capital F, false, it will allocate a Boolean data type. So we've now got a Boolean. So sometimes we call that a flag variable. So we're flagging and saying that at the moment, the instruction we're assuming is true, so it's okay. So the first thing that I wanted to do was to check whether the length was correct. So we could use an if statement here, and we could just say if the len of this MC, sorry, instruction is equivalent to 8. So remember that len returns the value of the length of a string. So if this was 8, then it is going to come back here as 8, and we want to know whether it is 8, so that's fine. So if the length is okay, so we're going to say valid instruction is true. It's actually already true at the moment, but this is just for completeness, really. Else, we could say that valid instruction is false. So we've done a little bit of the code. In fact, we've done a nice bit of the code there by checking whether the instruction is 8 bits long or not. And if it is 8 bits long, then we want to carry on. If it's not, then we don't necessarily. So we can use another if, and we can say if valid instruction is equal to true, So if valid instruction is equal to true, we're going to carry on. And the way that there's several ways of doing this. There's all kinds of ways of doing this. It depends how you program Python and how your mind works for Python. And I'm going to show you one way here, and then maybe on another video I'll show you a different way of doing this. So I decided to just count whether each bit was correct or not. So I've made valid count equal to 0, and then we're going to use a for loop. So I'm using I, because I often do, for I in the range, and we want to go 0 to 8 because that's our range of numbers to check. And then I'm just going to say inside here if this is if MC instruction is at position I is equivalent to 0 or MC instruction I is equivalent to 1, then I'm going to add 1 to my valid count. So my valid count will go up by 1. No, this is all the same line. And you can either say plus equals 1, or you can say valid count equals valid count plus 1. Both of those work. So then after I've done this for loop, so thinking about the lining up here of it, so after I've done that for loop, I'm going to say if valid count is less than 8, then valid instruction equals false. Because if it's less than 8, then one of these is not counted, so that means it wasn't a 0 or a 1. And so we've made that to be false. So that's done that part of the program. So the last bit of the program we want to do is that we want to convert this and do our printout. So printing out, you can do this any way you like. So we can say if valid instruction is false, then we're going to do our print statement here. And yeah, we can output whatever we like. We need to put out wrong for sure because it says that in the question. And then we can put an else in here, because if it's not false, it must be true. Then we can print OK. And so OK means the instruction was correct. So this is one way of doing this program. It's a correct way. It's a perfectly good way of doing it. We've written quite a bit of code for that. And I'm going to do another one that shows you a way of doing it with a bit less code. But as I say, it depends how your mind works and how your Python works when you're thinking about the way that these type of things are done. So this is exactly fine. There's no problem. We've done all the correct checks. And then obviously we could, if we'd got this in a programming development environment, we could obviously test these things here. We haven't in the exam, so we can't really test them, although we could run through our code in our head and look at how that works. But this is one perfectly good answer to this question. One thing we would point out, I want to point out here, this idea that if we didn't quite get all this code and we found it too difficult to do, there are marks available. So we're going to get a mark just for putting this as an input. We're going to get a mark just for having a variable that's a Boolean here. And that's quite nice. So we get a mark for this check, to check whether this is 8 or not. And you could obviously say if it's not 8 as well and do it the other way around. But this is another mark we could get So you see, there are lots of marks we can pick up even if we're not entirely sure how to do the whole thing. So again, if we've got our variable and we've got this kind of arrangement where we've got false and true and we're outputting, then we're likely to pick another markup for that too. So even if you're not sure how to do the rest of it, please have a go.